1, 2. Ah, there we go. Welcome to, oops. JSConf Korea presents a WebAssembly Field guide, easily worth like 70 bottle caps. Welcome to the World 6D73161. You have spent your whole life underground, always curious and fascinated by the gently humming machines around you, knowing your job, sustaining your community. Whatever caused a big calamity that forced your ancestors underground decades ago, it was already receding. People were recently starting wandering outside the heavy wall doors, exploring your desolate surroundings. The re-established connection to other settlements definitely came handy when you managed to barter a bulky operating manual and started discovering the depths of the technology that is at the beating heart of your underground habitat. And as newly appointed Chief Wall Technician, you were tasked to use this knowledge to improve the life of your community, and you have every intention in doing so. So hi, my name is Istvan Smorzhansky, and now you know exactly why I just stick with Flaki. I'm a freelance developer originally from Budapest, Hungary. I live in Estonia now. I spent quite some time in Asia in the past few years, but this is actually my first time in Korea, except that one transfer in Incheon Airport. So I'm really looking forward to seeing a bit of Seoul, at least after the conference. I'm a Mozilla Tech Speaker. Tech Speakers is a program by Mozilla to support its community members teaching and speaking at conferences, holding workshops, and generally educating people about open web technologies and the open web in general. I also work with Mozilla's DevRel team, where I help steer their community efforts, including the Tech Speakers program itself, and evangelizing open web technologies, especially some of the bleeding edge stuff like WebAssembly, service workers, or the systems programming language Rust. And if you have no idea what can Rust, the system programming language, do with the open web, we'll get there, so hold that thought. I've been following closely the developments around WebAssembly and related technologies for some time now. And I also participate in the WebAssembly community group that is driving the evolution of the specification and the expansion of WebAssembly's feature set. And you could be too. Yeah, you don't have to be a compiler engineer or work at a big influential company to be able to do this. The community group operates until the W3C, but is open to participation for anyone who is interested. If you just go to webassembly.org, click over to community, you can actually see all the many ways and learn more about the many ways you can contribute yourself. In this talk, I will mention some of the many ways Mozilla and people working at Mozilla contributed to the creation and the evolution of WebAssembly. And while I haven't been involved with the work myself, there is now an entire dedicated team at Mozilla dedicated for working on the bleeding edge of web technologies and shaping WebAssembly's future. Occasionally they even have positions open. So if you would be interested in being part of that work or just want to learn more about it, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm very happy to connect you with them. Before we dive in, there is one more caveat. This is not a talk to teach you about how WebAssembly looks like or how to generate WebAssembly code. There's great documentation, a couple of online playgrounds, tutorials. If you decide already that this is something that interests you, this talk is before that. How do you get there? How do you know if if you should care about WebAssembly in the first place? Or why should you care about WebAssembly in the first place? I've tried to show some pointers to that, and if you do decide to dive in after the talk, there is plenty of resources linked later in the slides. Due to the nature of technologies discussed here within, there is always a fair chance for any factually specific information regarding yada yada. Nobody really needs those disclaimers anyway. The gist of it is really just, this is highly volatile, work in progress stuff, so might change significantly even, like any time. So before you push this into production, be sure to do your own research. And now with that out of the way, let's get back to our favorite wall technician who is about to learn an invaluable lesson. A couple hundred pages into your newly acquired operating manual, you still seem to be stuck with historical tropes from an era where horse-drawn carriages roamed the streets. All this time, there is not a single bit of useful information or anything hands-on to be found on any of your vault systems. Like, what a waste of time! In your Southern Federal rage, you angrily toss the manual out onto the corridor, flying right past one of your elderly vault dwellers. You apologize profusely, explaining your situation, but the old man just laughs. His reply imparts a lifetime of wisdom. Oh dear, actually history provides the single most precious kind of knowledge amongst all. There are invaluable lessons to be learned from the context exposed by past history. And this is true. History provides context. Skepticism towards WebAssembly may often be rooted in the fact that very few are familiar with the technology's evolution, influences, goals, or history in short. Of course, we can't really expect every developer to know exactly what arduous journey WebAssembly has been through just to get where it is today, but I'll take a stab at highlighting some of the few main motivators, some real issues of the web platform, and the solutions WebAssembly aims to provide. But wait, Flaki, okay, that WebAssembly this and WebAssembly that. What is WebAssembly? Well, WebAssembly allows code that was written in any of a wide variety of programming languages to be run securely on the web. You take the original source code of a supporting programming language, it is compiled using the WebAssembly toolchain into a size and execution speed efficient binary format that can be used on the web, executed safely, at close to native speeds inside the web browser. Close to native speeds here refers to the fact that the execution speed of WebAssembly compiled binaries in many cases today are able to approach the performance of the same source code when it's compiled to the native execution format of any given platform. It's fast. Safe execution, on the other hand, means that refers to all the various ways that during execution, even before execution, the WebAssembly runtime ensures certain security and safety guarantees, and these are strictly enforced by the runtime that runs the WebAssembly code, which means running this third-party code on the user's machine remains safe, robust, and isolated from the rest of the page, while all the same time retaining all the speed guarantees. Let me give you a whirlwind tour of the history. Before 2012, that was like what I call the primordial period, you know, dinosaurs, jQuery, except JavaScript has been steadily increasing in speed since like 2008, when V8 was released. And that kind of like whipped up a browser war when like all JavaScript engines were competing with each other, trying to increase the speeds of the JavaScript. It still wasn't enough. You can never have enough speed. So ASM.js debuted in 2013. It was created as a easy to optimize JavaScript subset that compilers and tools could use to directly target to generate code that will run in the browser. Browser JavaScript engines had specific optimizations for this kind of code, so they were fast. In supporting browsers, it was even possible to compile entire games and 3D engines with barely any changes to the original source code with ASM.js, and just run them in the browser at comfortable speeds. It wasn't super fast, but like it worked really well. You could call spiritual successor WebAssembly was released in 2015. All 4 major browsers actually shipped support in a few months wide time period. And it continues to be actively developed. Now, I'm not really going to teach you an actual history lesson. I think it's more interesting to actually take a look at some of WebAssembly's key features and have a look into how they came to be. So WebAssembly has been built on a core principle that could be summarized as augment, not obsolete. This means that it focuses on seamless integration, really striving to extend and complement the existing web platform rather than trying to compete with it. In fact, WebAssembly modules are largely inert without the embedder's cooperation and don't expose any features beyond those that are already available to JS. Embedder here means the host environment, so the browser is one as such, but there are quite a few other embedders these days. In the case of the browser's JavaScript embedder, one could say with some simplification that with WebAssembly today, you won't be able to do anything that your JavaScript doesn't do already. But what you could do is you could do probably potentially faster. After the embedder actually instantiates your WebAssembly module, it allocates its own memory. So your WebAssembly module will have its own memory, and the embedding runtime will pass it all other resources it needs. This means the imports and exports, the function calls it requires, and the live module after this itself is largely self-contained and has very limited access to its environment. This is also known as the principle of least privilege. You only want to provide the WebAssembly module with access to resources that you are pretty sure it exactly needs, and nothing more. API calls that need to access the network or storage still need to go to the JavaScript runtime or browser APIs. And the module might have hooks into the system APIs and other JavaScript bindings that were passed in. Or it may request services such as more memory via the JavaScript API, but the embedding environment has the authority to deny any of such requests, which means WebAssembly module is highly dependent on the cooperation of the embedder itself. There are actually even more in-flight proposals that are of the WebAssembly standard that are working towards deepening and extending this integration. The cooperative and complementary relationship actually predates WebAssembly. I mentioned ASM.js was a JavaScript subset, and that is still practically JavaScript. But its true brilliance lies in the fact that the changes required for supporting ASM.js optimizations were so minimal that all large browsers wanted in. So ASM.js feature set was soon enough, one after the other, all modern browsers has shipped support for ASM.js optimizations in their engines, and the cooperation of browser renderers outlived ASM.js. Following its success, the people who worked on ASM.js started exploring ways to the work that is needed to fix the ASM.js's inherent shortcomings. For a casual observer, WebAssembly is often perceived as simple. Usually, this refers to the highly constrained feature set. After shipping ASM.js, it became clear that some of the shortcomings cannot be fixed without actually breaking the web or just reimagining how the architecture worked. And this spawned a lot of explorations, which eventually converged into what we call the WebAssembly MVP today. The WebAssembly MVP, this collaboration made way for the WebAssembly MVP, a minimum viable WebAssembly. This was like a robust, extensible, and future-proof foundation that was laid out even in this like diverse setting, like Microsoft and Apple collaborating. And more contentious issues, so there was a minimal feature set, and the more contentious issues were set aside to bake for some additional time, or to be informed by some of the early adopters. This left WebAssembly in a constant state of evolution as the community group designs additional enhancements based on the implementer's feedback. But it's not the only thing that WebAssembly had access to. So this, oh, there we go. So this might seem like that it was not only the specifications resource constraints that caused WebAssembly's simplicity, but it was also a deliberate design choice. The entire specification is around 100 pages. The instruction set or the formal definition of the runtime fits a single page. And these are some sentences out of the specification itself. No computation can crash or otherwise misbehave in ways not covered by the execution semantics given in this specification. This robustness stems from the fact that the WebAssembly runtime itself is very, very simple, very straightforward. This property, the safe and secure execution, at consistently fast, close to native speeds on all target platforms is already hinting towards use cases beyond the web. But let us not get ahead of ourselves and just talk a little bit about what creators on the web had to gain first. Almost a year have passed since you first got your hand on your first operating manual. Slowly but surely you have become more handy around the world, fixed this, rebuilt that, even gained some notoriety for some of your creations and your knowledge. You occasionally get visitors from other worlds seeking your advice or experience. You cannot not fondly remember that one time when you almost knocked a poor fellow world dweller unconscious with the booking frustration of being useless. He smiled as he put the finishing touches on a new piece of machinery as it whirred to life with a lively squealing as you pushed the big green button. Why should you WebAssemble? Often it's not immediately easy to see the benefit of a technology for one's own use cases. But this doesn't mean that it doesn't have any. Industry testimonials, finding the ideal use case often takes time and rarely happens without exploratory research and experimentation. Industry testimonials that report significant gains from making use of WebAssembly almost never fail to mention the winding road they have to embark on before the true benefits of the technology started shining through. One of the first and to this date most mature tools used in the ecosystem is Emscripten, a C++ compiler for ASM.js and WebAssembly. Emscripten is as old as the entire ecosystem. It was born and then co-evolved alongside ASM.js. When WebAssembly rolled around, Emscripten was one of the first tools to support it as an output target format. Emscripten made it possible, easy even, to compile large pre-existing code bases, libraries, or even entire apps, sometimes millions of lines of code for the web. Not the most prevalent web use case, I'll admit, but surely not many of you had ever had the sudden urge to ship a AAA game title to a vanilla web browser, I guess. Furthermore, often these compiled bundles, you input a lot of code, you get out a lot of code, ended up tens or even hundreds of megabytes, which is a very scary figure considering the ever-increasing bloat of the web, today's websites. All of this is to say that there are certainly found or even funded enthusiastic niche or following for compiling for the browser, but stay quite far from becoming mainstream. Even for those who are not writing their own games and Astro class apps, Emscripten was still useful though. One could write a smallish module in a low-level programming language like C or C++, compile it, and use it in one's app to surgically replace the performance-sensitive parts or use it to target the web as one of the platforms. One would need to be able to write code in a low-level language as well as write JavaScript glue code to these custom modules, rarely making these the most reusable, most portable pieces of code ever written, but it worked. Emscripten is not the only way, though. Rust was one of the first low-level systems languages that not only added built-in support for WebAssembly target, but it took it one step further and even doubled down on supporting WebAssembly as a first-class citizen. High performance, robust memory guarantees, stellar docs, sophisticated tooling, and extensive library of crates, which is third-party modules building from the NPM on the thread of NPM that could be imported and reused in an NPM-ish fashion, made Rust an ideal choice for someone who wanted to go deep but unwilling to deal with C++ shenanigans. And if I'm preaching Rust, that's because I'm a huge fan. So we actually run a Rust conference ourselves in Europe. But if you don't want to go that far, there's a Rust Tokyo conference happening in October. So you should definitely check that out. Of course, not everyone can or wants to learn a code in a low-level language just to get shit done. AssemblyScript provides a language for this with much more familiar semantics to all JavaScript developers. It's like a subset of TypeScript, and it serves as a much lower barrier of entry for creating WebAssembly modules, bespoke WebAssembly modules for web developers. But to quote Surma, you don't need to understand all of this to be a good web developer or even to make good use of WebAssembly in the first place. Surma here in the quoted post, he means that one doesn't need to be using bespoke tooling just to be able to create a WebAssembly module in one project. And surely Emscripten or just using precompiled WASM modules will go a long way with tools like AssemblyScript, and more languages adding direct support, purpose-built components will also thrive. But even so, it's hard to imagine that offering WebAssembly modules will become a mainstream task undertaken by the majority of web developers. And that's perfectly fine. It shouldn't be. The good news is one does not need to know WebAssembly or even know about WebAssembly to be able to benefit from the new technology's ecosystem effects. Proposals such as interface types proposal, the web ideal bindings, or the ongoing ES module integration currently underway are working towards integrating WebAssembly modules even more seamlessly into the ecosystem. In the future, you would just import a module using your favorite package manager, and it could be using WebAssembly under the hood without the user even being aware of the fact in the first place. Also, even if one's production code won't end up using WebAssembly, one might still benefit from WebAssembly by build tooling. Webpack was one of the early experimenters who had really good results, promising results, trying to use WebAssembly for improving build times. With recent announcements around interface types by the Mozilla WebAssembly team, this already pretty futuristic sounding paradise might be closer than you would think. But let us have a glance at a slightly even more further out potential of WebAssembly. Well, Mother Nature certainly didn't stop coming up with bizarre new ideas while you and your compatriots were hiding in your cozy underground embrace of your vaults. The swirling display of almost a dozen tails on this weird-looking animal as you emerge from the vault on one evening is sending chills down your spine. Hard to call it nightmarish, as you're pretty sure you could never even dream up such a strange creature. What is it? Is it friendly or is it hostile? Yes, you will find out soon enough. And sure enough, you know, it's tough to predict the future of a nascent ecosystem. And WebAssembly is no different. We don't really know where all of it will end up until we actually get there. Some of the currently discussed post-MVP features, garbage collection integration, web IDL integration, tail calls, threading, to name a few, will make it possible for more languages to target and interoperate with the web. This also includes more exotic ones, you know, languages that look much less like JavaScript today. And this is, of course, not new. We live in an age of Babel and TypeScript and Elm and Reason, but WebAssembly will make this process even better and the edge out much faster. This is not only interesting from a technology standpoint, but also increasing the diversity and accessibility of developing for the web. Allowing people to use whatever language they feel the most comfortable with rather than mandating one particular one on the web will make the web platform much more resilient in the future. Because of every language wanting to run in the browser, now suddenly you have a common low-level layer they all support. Tibor Vasindjaba quotes something that is frequently observed: the web platform's gravity have given WebAssembly adoption an incredible boost, but not all use cases necessarily need to involve the browser. Sure, the web may be an excellent medium to popularize the use of WebAssembly, but the same modules could later be adopted for, or in certain cases just ran out of the box in any WebAssembly compatible runtime. And then why would we restrict ourselves to the browser? WebAssembly seems to have properties that could come handy in various other contexts too, wouldn't they? Would it be possible to take some of the values of safe and secure sandboxing in the browser beyond the web with WebAssembly? Would it be possible to still provide enough power and flexibility required by all the other use cases? These are the questions that are being explored in the sister specification of WebAssembly, the WebAssembly System Interface, or WASI for short. What would it take to take WebAssembly into the restricted environments and providing more capabilities, still retaining most of the safety guarantees that make the web so unique? WASI is another tremendous effort in reimagining certain aspects of computing that we simply just never question and take it as a given. The proposal initially presented by Mozilla, but is now worked on in its own subgroup of the WebAssembly community group, and has the potential to extend WebAssembly's usefulness in a standardized way across a variety of non-web use cases. And you know, if you squint at it, the web, embedded, cloud, at the end of the day, you might realize that what seem vastly different are actually closer to each other than we think. Code size constraints on a web app, reducing bytes sent through the wire, may correspond to requirements on edge computing servers, storage limitations, or sync time, as well as microcontrollers, which have very limited memory. We can already see that it's not only that WebAssembly is making its way to all of these other platforms, but it motivates the creation of small self-contained libraries that is going to feed back to a transitive effect into the web ecosystem. And when we have all done all that, why stop there? What if anyone could use the language of your choice to program, but we didn't stop at programming languages or different paradigms, but we went all the way to liberating programming of the Anglo-centric human language? What if learning programming didn't have to start with learning English or the Latin alphabet? What if you weren't hindered by knowing the difference between what an if is or what a for is? What if you could write the code entirely in Korean, for example? Ramsey Netzer is the rather well-known creator of the first Arabic programming language. It's called Gelb. The font doesn't support, so you will see the expanded URL on the bottom in the slides. He has an astounding and thought-provoking talk from the Construct conference earlier that explored, almost there. A thought-provoking talk from the Construct conference earlier this year that explored how a purely language-agnostic programming language or paradigm could look like. His design prototype actually builds on WebAssembly as the underlying machinery-built code storage, with code fragments living in the distributed web, accessible for anyone, with language-specific metadata layered above to give everyone a chance to write and reuse code in their own native tongue. I don't have, unfortunately, any links for this, but as soon as the talk recording will come out, I will put them into the slides. So it said WebAssembly's potential is seemingly limitless. In this case, its properties are low-level binary format and platform-agnostic disposition, made it an ideal choice for something truly fresh and unique. The only question is, the only question that remains is, what will you do with WebAssembly? And with that, yep. Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Mozilla WebAssembly team for their amazing work on WebAssembly in general. Javi Hoffman, Pilar Huy Dobro, and Jess Rose for their help and support in reviewing this talk. Lynn Clark for the amazingly detailed cartoon deep dives, which are linked later on in the resources section. Jeff Lambeck, Alexander Pope, and Lynn Clark, who influenced in big ways the format of this talk, and the organizers, and especially Susan for putting up with me, and Figma, who for their incredible in-browser vector editor built with WASM, that uses WASM actually. Many of the graphics for this talk was actually created, almost all graphics for this talk was created with Figma. And with that, I think I have one more thing. As I can see on the big zeros on the time board, I was running horribly out of time, so I couldn't fit a demo in there anywhere. And I was like, but really, Flaki, you should have fit a demo in there. So what I decided to is to, make the slides the demo itself. So if all goes well, you can see the slides link on the below, talk.flak.is/wasm/JSConf Korea. If I exit here, you're going to see the slide talk. It's just a regular web page. The regular web page with regular images that has regular alt tags on them, so everybody can access it with a screen reader, you can see the talk, you can see all the notes. When I enter presentation mode, JavaScript and WebAssembly kicks in. The online version doesn't have the experimental WebAssembly, it has the experimental JavaScript kit. What happens here, this effect that you see on the stage is generated by WebAssembly reinterpreting the web page, which means you can use the web as you could use to before, and you can use the WebAssembly to augment the currently existing possibilities on the web. So with that, thank you very much, and thank you again.